Hello, dear. How are you? I'm here again to continue with you the story. And today we are going to read aloud pages 298 and 300 with correct pronunciation, intonation, and fluency. Then we will answer related comprehension questions. And at the end, you will solve the question number 2, part B, page 246 in the practice book. And don't forget to keep a paper and a pencil with you and to put your reading and practice books in front of you. And before we continue reading, let's summarize the previous pages. We all know that the title of our story is The Dinosaurs of Waterhouse Hawkins. And the setting of our story is 1853 in London. The characters Waterhouse Hawkins and Richard Owen. And the main events till now are Waterhouse was expecting important visitors. Waterhouse loved to draw and paint animals, and particularly he loved to sculpt models of them. And he was working on building dinosaurs to display them in the Crystal Palace. Let's continue reading now to find out who were the visitors and what did he do with his project. And here we go. Look at this picture. What can you see in it? It seems that we have here new characters. Let's start with the place. It is Waterhouse's workshop, and we have drawings on the walls. Here is Waterhouse. Beside him, a man. Whom do you think this man is? Maybe Richard Owen. And what about the men and the women who are entering the workshop? Do we know them? I think they are Waterhouse's visitors, but we don't know who are they. Look at their clothes. What are they wearing? They are wearing elegant clothes, so they look rich. And now look at the impressions on their faces. How do they look? As if they are astonished or surprised? Why do you think they are astonished? Maybe because of Waterhouse's tremendous dinosaurs. Okay, dear, so we will start reading to know more about these two visitors and Waterhouse's dinosaurs. Listen to the audio script now.
Waterhouse threw open the doors to his workshop. Nervously, he tidied up here and there. His assistants came, then Richard Owen. At last, the visitors arrived, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. The Queen's eyes grew wide in surprise. Waterhouse's creatures were extraordinary. How on earth had he made them? He was happy to explain. The iguanodon, for instance, had teeth that were quite similar to the teeth of an iguana. The iguanodon, then, must surely have looked like a giant iguana. Waterhouse pointed out that the few iguanodon bones helped determine the model's size and proportion. And another bone, almost a spike, most likely sat on the nose, like a rhino's horn. Just so for the megalosaurus. Start with its jawbone. Compare it to the anatomy of a lizard. Fill in the blanks. And voila, a dinosaur more than 40 feet long. Waterhouse was also making ancient reptiles and amphibians. While Richard Owen could imagine their shapes, it took an artist to bring the animals to life.
Okay, dear, I'm going to start explaining this page. So Waterhouse arrived to his workshop. He organized up here and there, then Richard Owen and his assistants came. So he's not working alone, we have a group of assistants who are helping him. After that, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert arrived, and they must be the visitors of Waterhouse. When they attended his workshop, The queen's eyes grew wide in surprise. So she was surprised, and she opened her eyes widely when she saw his extraordinary creatures. How on earth had he made them? The queen didn't believe that someone on earth can do such great creatures. Then Waterhouse started to explain to his visitors more about each dinosaur, starting with the iguanodon that has teeth quite similar to the teeth of an iguana. So here Waterhouse compared the teeth of an iguana to that of an iguanodon. But the iguanodon looked like a giant iguana, so here the difference is in the size. Also he added that the bones they discovered helped him determine or conclude the size and proportion of the model. And a proportion here is the shape and the size of the model. Moreover, they found a spike that sat on the nose, and it looked like a rhino's horn. Also he compared here the spike of the iguanodon to that of a rhino's horn. And Waterhouse's second dinosaur was the Megalosaurus. He compared the jawbone of the Megalosaurus to the anatomy of the lizard, which is a living animal. And his third dinosaur was Voila, which is a dinosaur more than 40 feet long. Furthermore, Waterhouse was making models of reptiles, which are animals that crawl or creep, and amphibians, animals that live both on land and water, with the help of the scientist Richard Owen. It's time to answer my questions, and don't forget that you have to write them on a piece of paper. Listen to me while reading the questions. Number 1. Who visited Waterhouse in his workshop? Number 2. What was the reaction of the queen? Number 3. How did the queen describe Waterhouse's creatures? Number 4. Describe the iguanodon. And number 5. How was he able to determine the size and proportion of the model? Pause the video now and write the answers on a paper. Let's check the answers now. Number 1. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert visited his workshop. Number 2. The Queen's eyes grew wide in surprise. Number 3. The Queen described Waterhouse's creatures as extraordinary. Number 4. The iguanodon had teeth quite similar to the teeth of an iguana and looked like a giant iguana. Number 5. The few iguanodon bones helped him determine the model size and proportion. Hope your answers are correct. And this is a new illustration. Tell me what caught your eyes once you looked at this picture. I'm sure that most of you will say that this gigantic dinosaur had caught your eyes. What else can you see in this picture? We have captions that are numbered and presented by Waterhouse. But why do you think these captions are numbered? Because they are the steps that Waterhouse had followed to create his model. So, what might this page be about? Maybe it's about the steps of creating a dinosaur. And now we are going to read page 300 to know more about the steps of creating a dinosaur. We know from this illustration that there are 6 steps, but we have to learn more about these steps to know how Waterhouse was able to create this gigantic, detailed, and colorful dinosaur. Here are the meanings of the unfamiliar words that you will read on page 300. Listen to me well by explaining them. The word monumental means huge or enormous. Erected means set up. Skeleton is a framework of bones, like the one shown in the illustration in front of you. Foundations are the bases. Like here we have the foundation of this skeleton. Brick, made from bricks, which is a building material used to make walls. Life size, Natural size. Cement is also a material used in building. Scales are small pieces you find on the skin of a dinosaur.
Designing the creatures was only the first step. There was still the monumental task of building them. Waterhouse showed his guests the small models he'd made, correct in every detail, from scales on the nose to nails on the toes. With the help of his assistants, he had formed the life-size clay figures and created the molds from them. Then he erected iron skeletons, built brick foundations, and covered the whole thing with cement casts from the dinosaur-shaped molds. It is no less, Waterhouse concluded, than building a house upon 4 columns.
In this page, Waterhouse is telling us more about the steps of creating his creatures. First of all, he drew and designed his creatures. Then, he started working on building them. He made small models of them and concentrated on every detail, from scales on the nose to nails on the toes. So even the tiny parts of his dinosaurs were detailed. After that, he formed the small models. He worked with his assistants on forming the life-size, which is the natural size, clay figures. Then he set up iron skeletons and built brick foundations. And at the end, he covered the mold with cement cast. Waterhouse concluded that it was like building a house upon 4 columns. And now follow with me while reading the questions to find their answers on page 300. Number 1. What was Waterhouse's first step in creating a model of a dinosaur? Number 2. What did Waterhouse show his guests? Number 3. How can you tell that his models were detailed? Number 4. Who helped him in forming the life-size clay figures? Number 5. List his next steps after forming the natural size clay figures. Number 6. What materials did he use to cover the whole dinosaur-shaped mold? Pause the video now and write the answers on a piece of paper to check them after you finish. Here are the answers of my questions. Number 1. Designing the creatures was his first step. Number 2. Waterhouse showed his guests the small models he made. Number 3. His models were detailed because they were correct in every detail, from scales on the nose to nails on the toes. Number 4. His assistants helped him in forming the life-size clay figures. Number 5. The steps were: he erected iron skeletons, he built brick foundations, and he covered the whole thing with cement casts. And number 6. He used cement casts to cover the mold. Okay dear, and now it's time to practice reading, so follow with me please. Waterhouse threw open the doors to his workshop. Nervously, he tidied up here and there. His assistants came, then Richard Owen. At last, the visitors arrived, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. The Queen's eyes grew wide in surprise. Waterhouse's creatures were extraordinary. How on earth had he made them? He was happy to explain. The iguanodon, for instance, had teeth that were quite similar to the teeth of an iguana. The iguanodon, then, must surely have looked like a giant iguana. Waterhouse pointed out that the few iguanodon bones helped determine the model's size and proportion, and another bone, almost a spike, most likely sat on the nose, like a rhino's horn. Just so for the Megalosaurus. Start with its jawbone. Compared to the anatomy of the lizard, Fill in the blanks, and voila! A dinosaur more than 40 feet long. Waterhouse was also making ancient reptiles and amphibians. While Richard Owen could imagine their shapes, it took an artist to bring the animals to life. And now listen to me to know how to pronounce each word. Extraordinary, iguanodon, rhino's horn, megalosaurus, ancient, reptiles, amphibians, jawbone. Designing the creatures was only the first step. There was still the monumental task of building them. Waterhouse showed his guests the small models he'd made, correct in every detail, from scales on the nose to nails on the toes. With the help of his assistants, he had formed the life-size clay figures and created the molds from them. Then he erected iron skeletons, built brick foundations, and covered the whole thing with cement casts from the dinosaur-shaped molds. It is no less, Waterhouse concluded, than building a house upon 4 columns. And now listen to the pronunciation of each word. Monumental, figures, iron skeleton, cement casts, brick foundations, erected, concluded. Muhammad is a hard-working and creative student. He wanted to surprise his English teacher with a special project related to the coming lesson. So when he knew that the lesson will be about dinosaurs, he decided to form a model of a dinosaur. But he had many questions in his head about the way to form such a model. How can I make a model of a dinosaur for my teacher? I'll search on the internet. So what materials do I need to make a dinosaur? And what steps do I have to follow? And who can help me in forming a model? I got it. I will ask Dad. Surely he will help me. Hello, Dad. I need your help. What are the steps to form a model of a dinosaur? Hello, son. Follow me to tell you. To create a dinosaur, you have to draw a picture of a dinosaur. Then you have to bring the materials you need. Next, you have to form the shape of the dinosaur in a mold. Then you have to start sculpting the details of the dinosaur. And at the end, paint the model after you check all the details. That's it. Thank you, Dad. I'll start working on them.